The other thing I want to just mention is that the brain communicates within itself and seeks balance, but it also communicates with the body. I said earlier, depression is a very physical illness, and this is true. You can see very obvious, overt physical signs in someone who has the illness of depression, other than the subjective statement that I feel bad. You can notice changes in their heart rate and pulse. You can notice changes in the way the gastrointestinal system works. You can notice changes in skin and general sort of a whole host of different physical things. You also can see as a doctor that patients with depression are more vulnerable to other physical illnesses. So in a way, one of the many double whammies of depression, not only is it the illness that takes over the bit of you that normally fights illness, i.e. the self, but also, you know, sort of, well done, you got the lottery win this time. Not only do you get the illness of depression, but you're more vulnerable to a whole lot of other illnesses too. Cancer, heart disease, diabetes, all are statistically more common in people with histories of depression. Doesn't mean they're going to get them, and you know, sort of mass panic in the room, but these things are factually true. And one of the things that depression does, and one of the ways that, if you like, the brain communicates with the body, is via a very, very clever hormonal system. The primitive worm bit of the brain mostly does it through a nerve, the vagus nerve, the wandering nerve, and that sends messages to the guts and the heart, and does things which we recognise in our language, you know, the connection between emotional state and physical state. You know, I was feeling really sick with nerves before I stood up on the stage, or various other expressions that I was heartbroken, that just display our knowledge of that link. The reptilian brain, the more evolved next stage up, came up with a sort of extra way of communicating, which is incredibly clever, which involves a chemical messenger link called hormones from the brain, a place in the brain called the hypothalamus, to the pituitary gland, to the glands in the body, particularly the adrenal glands. Now, most people would know that the adrenal glands are the sort of stress glands. They produce cortisol, produce lots of things, but cortisol is the so-called stress hormone. And this axis from hypothalamus, pituitary to adrenals is a way in which the brain communicates with the body. I should also mention the thyroid gland, which is kind of linked into, and whatever is going on up there in the brain chemically is sort of sent, information is sent to these glands. And so, for example, deficiencies in the immune system, amongst other things, may relate to whacking too much cortisol into the system for too long, and your system kind of is imbalanced. There's too much, it's unable to rebalance itself. Consequence, getting infections because your immune system's not up to scratch. So the chemistry of that is understood, recognised. There's a lot more that needs to be learned, but it's a very clear factual link between an illness that some people deny exists and a full sort of impact on the body in all kinds of different ways. So where this leaves us is that somebody comes into my office and says, Dr. Collins, I'm feeling depressed, or whatever else, I'm hearing voices, or whatever, let's stay with I'm feeling depressed. Somehow, I've got to kind of work out what that means. Depression is just a word, everybody understands it differently. In a way, I wish the illness of depression had some completely different name, because people have so many assumptions. Depression is a sort of normal part of human experience. You know, we've all, regardless of whether we've been diagnosed with a mental health illness or not, can presumably say, yeah, I felt really depressed about something. It's in the language. But first of all, one's got to try and sort of understand what that person's experience is. And then there's a whole lot of things that go with the depression. And Ruby, in her show, has talked so eloquently about some of the stuff that just goes on in the brain. This is the real sort of killer, as I say, of the disease, is that not only do you have it, but it's affecting normally deal with having it. The two sort of ends of the spectrum of the sort of retarded, slowed down, everything is kind of mush, there's no joy in anything. Talking of brain chemicals again, the dopamine circuits are down. Dopamine is the chemical that gives us feedback. Again, it does lots of other things, but it sort of gives us positive reward. It's highly associated with feel good. The addicts know that by getting themselves into states of massive dopamine overload. But every human has dopamine, and when you're depressed, down it goes. You do something, you know you like it intellectually, but actually you feel nothing. And that sort of feeds into a general life is hopeless, I've got no energy. You've got another type of sort of variant of the same thing, which is these sort of agitated, non-stop, speeded up thoughts going crazy, and that always negative thoughts. You've got the spectacles that filter out anything that is positive, and you only perceive and remember the negative, and these thoughts can quite literally drive you crazy. And they are real. When you're experiencing them, you're real. They're real. So I've got to try and work out what this person's experience is, and then I've got to try and put together, where does it come from? There's a lot of discussion about nature and nurture. We know that there is an inherited predisposition to depression, for sure. You can do studies. I mean, the most obvious study is looking at twins, comparing identical twins, non-identical twins. Identical have the same DNA, non-identical have similar DNA but not the same. And the incidence of depression in an identical sibling twin, if one of them has got it, is about 75%. Don't quote me exactly on that figure, but it's that kind of ballpark. It drops to about 50% in non-identical twins, fraternal twins. And you can do studies looking at what happens to children who are adopted, see whether they follow their adoptive parents or biological parents. The summation of all of that is that there is a component of depression which is kind of wired in the DNA. What you're probably inheriting is a predisposition to get the illness, in some vague sense. You're not inheriting the illness as such, you're inheriting something that makes it more likely that you'll get it if other circumstances happen. In terms of what happens, well, early experience does, as I say, by imbalancing both the amygdala-hippocampus circuit, by having long-term deleterious effects on the HPA axis, the thing that leads ultimately to too much cortisol, that sets up sort of tracks in the brain that, again, predispose to depression. Or you can have a perfectly good normal set of genes. You can have had a perfectly, uneventful life, lovely childhood, and still you can get it. We know certain things make that more likely as well, like sort of so-called loss life events. If you have a whole lot of losses in one go, or a serious loss, you are more vulnerable to depression. It's a state of imbalance the brain is vulnerable to.